inhabiting our range, about appropriately filling our space. And they're based on a quote from Dogen's Genjo Koan, which I will read using Shohaku Okamura's translation. When a fish swims, no matter how far it swims, it doesn't reach the end of the water. When a bird flies, no matter how high it flies, it cannot reach the end of the sky. When the bird's need or the fish's need is great, the range is large. When the need is small, the range is small. In this way, each fish and each bird uses the whole of space and vigorously acts in every place. So to paraphrase this a little bit, fish can't know the whole ocean. Birds can't know the whole sky. Sometimes they use a big portion of the ocean or sky. Sometimes they use a small portion of the ocean or sky. But by using a small portion of it, they actually use all of it. And they can do this only if they fully use their portion, if they fully inhabit it. So there are kind of two contradictory ideas going on here about the space we inhabit. There's the idea that we as living creatures inhabit just the right amount of space, a portion of space. So in a way, we're limited to our allotted space, and yet by acting fully in our limited allotted range, we're somehow acting in the whole of space. And it's not surprising that we have two seemingly contradictory ideas here, because this is Zen and that's how it works. It is not logical. We need to somehow be able to hold these two contradictory ideas in our mind at the same time. Uchiyama says that even if a goldfish is confined to a goldfish bowl, it is somehow inhabiting all of space. And I like that metaphor because I've been kind of feeling like a goldfish in a goldfish bowl lately. Kind of longing for the vast ocean, or at least a little pond, or at least an aquarium or a bigger goldfish bowl, or at least a couple of more goldfish in my bowl. Anyway, the point is, if we put our whole hearts into the thing we're doing this very moment, then we are connected to all things. But if we're looking beyond our immediate situation, if we're looking towards some ideal, we're not fully in our place. If the goldfish spends all of its time dreaming about the pond and hating its circumstance, it is not fully inhabiting the goldfish bowl. And it's appropriate for the goldfish to plan its escape, if that's possible. If there's a possibility of leaping from the bowl into a nearby aquarium or something, that's great. But if it's not possible, it's kind of a waste of time to be wanting those things. And this is a little bit like the snake in the bamboo tube, another popular metaphor. You're stuck. No amount of fantasy will get you out. And if you've ever done a retreat, you probably can kind of relate to that. It's kind of like being stuck in a bamboo tube. But now here's the crucial thing, and it's the magical thing, and maybe the ironic thing. If that goldfish thoroughly inhabits the goldfish bowl, rather than dreaming about the ocean, it may very well find itself in the ocean. There is liberation in thoroughly inhabiting this place at this moment. Dreaming of the ocean won't do it. Being here does it, and then we find ourselves in the ocean. You don't get it by reaching for it. You get it by being completely here. It's a little counterintuitive, but that's how it works. And this idea of inhabiting our space isn't just philosophy, it's basic to our practice. We can only do our practice, our deep meditation practice, if we thoroughly inhabit the moment. And that means, as you've heard probably many times, being present with whatever arises and not thinking about other things, not thinking about how things should be, not thinking about a goal, not thinking about what a problem things are, not thinking at all, but just being present with what is here. So if we're sitting and something unpleasant arises, it's not helpful really to be in a place of, ooh, I really wish this was different. And we can spend a lot of time there when our meditation seems to be going badly. Oh, I so wish this was different. And I need a plan because I need to get from here to there. But it's better to be in a place of, wow, I really don't like this, but I'm going to stay here with this and I'm going to see how it feels. Because you always start where you are. It's better if anxiety or anger arises to ask yourself, well, what does it feel like to sit in this chair right now? Than to think about how difficult things are. It's helpful to find the emotion in your body and let it be. Be who you are. If you're a fish, be a fish. Don't dream of being a bird. And if you can thoroughly be a fish, you very well might find yourself being a bird. Being present with what is, with what it's like to sit in your chair, connects you with all time and space. Thinking about how you would like things to be different separates you from all time and space. And last week I related this to Dogen's ideas about Dharma position and to an idea about Huayan Buddhism from China, to the house and rafter analogy. In a sense, the rafter is the entire house because houseness depends upon the rafter. It can't be a house without the rafter. And yet, the rafter can support the house only by fully fulfilling its function as a rafter, by being its self. Ted can only be interconnected with all things if he is thoroughly Ted. He can't do it by dreaming of being someone else. Form is emptiness, and emptiness is form, and interconnectedness exists only because there is separateness. So last week, I said I would provide two real-world examples of this, both having to do with our current difficult situation arising from the pandemic. And the first one has to do with our national response to coronavirus. And I'm only going to talk about this briefly. I don't want to dwell on it. And I actually often recommend to people that they cut back a little bit on their news intake. Some of us have a lot of time on our hands right now. And if we read or listen to or watch a whole lot of news, and especially if we get into a grasping state about it, you know, I get more and more and more news, it can really be harmful to our peace of mind. It can form a kind of incessant background in our minds. And yes, we have an obligation to be informed, but I think limiting our news intake somewhat will actually help us to be informed in a more balanced and a more even way. But I can, I think, extend Dogen's metaphor to this situation. As a nation, I mean, if you look at what our nation is doing and what results we're getting compared to other nations, it seems like we're a fish trying to be a bird. The fish fully inhabits its range. It determines whether that range is large or small, and it does the right thing. It faces the reality of the situation. It acts appropriately based on the facts. It realizes what is limited and what is unlimited, what it can change and what it can't change. It accepts the things it can't change, and it changes the things that it can change. And it feels to me that as a nation, we're really in denial of that reality. there's been this kind of magical thinking at the top layer. Someday coronavirus will simply go away. We're not going to let science get in the way of reopening schools. Someone actually said that, someone in the White House. And so the degree of irresponsibility coming from the top is really shocking. We're trying to be a bird. We're a fish imagining what it's like to be a bird, and we're just acting like a bird, pretending we're not a fish. We're acting as if there is no coronavirus, and as if that's the way to make it go away. We're inhabiting an imaginary space rather than the space that we've been allotted. And maybe that's changing, and I really, really hope it does. And it's certainly not true of everyone, but I do see that element there. And it's only by embracing the limitations of our situation, of facing reality, that we will find ourselves no longer in this situation. So we can push for reality. We can push to change things. We can each set a good example ourselves and affect other people in that way. So the second example, which I'll spend a little more time on, is our response to isolation on a personal level. And you know, it's kind of hard to talk about. I feel almost an obligation to address it. You have to say something. It's hard to talk about because I have my experience, you have yours. I talk to a lot of people, but still I can't know what everyone else's experience is. And so I don't want to talk about my own experience as if it's universal. And yet, I do need to say something. And I have to acknowledge it in some ways. I am privileged, so that my situation is not the same as everyone else's. But in the beginning of isolation, we closed down the building on March 13th, and that's when I began staying home. There was a great flurry of activity at that time, and I think I rose to the occasion and actually was quite energized, and I think that may have been the case for a lot of people. But that seems like a long, long time ago. And after a while, things settled into a sort of routine. And I had a pretty good period going there where I had really good routines and I seemed really productive. And then things were totally shaken up again with the killing of George Floyd. And it's been harder to stick to a routine ever since then. And now we're 4 months into isolation. And I feel like it's getting hard in a new way, but I don't really know how to explain what that way is. And I'm struggling like everyone else. My response to the situation doesn't always match my ideal of what my response should be. It seems like over and over, I want to come up with a new plan that's going to fix it all. And reality doesn't seem to accept my plans very well. So I flail a little bit. What should I be doing? Who am I going to try to be today? So it may feel like we're constantly trying to invent ourselves, and we're constantly not really finding an invention that works. Because for all we say about no self, you still have to come up with something to meet the world every day. And so much of the time, we're just like, I don't know. And maybe that's not surprising. Maybe we're at a phase in this thing where the long-term implications are really sinking in. Maybe that's just me, I don't know. But I was listening to an interview yesterday, a Krista Tippett interview with Pauline Boss, who is a family therapist, from about a week ago. And one of them used the phrase, settling in about the losses. They said we're at the point where it's just beginning to sink in how long this could last. And that's not an easy thing to face. It's a new kind of realization. And there were a lot of good points on that show, and I recommend listening to it. It's just about a half hour long. You can find it at onbeing.com, onbeing.com. So some of the points were, we're not in control of the virus, but there is a lot we can control. We can control our response to it to a great extent. Very important point. Another point was that we should not fight the reality that we are grieving. And grief is exhausting, and we should remember that. It's okay to be exhausted. If you're exhausted, that doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. That means you're having a rational response to the situation. Also, your grief is very real, even if it seems small. Because you might say, well, I don't have it nearly as bad as other people. I'm not sick, and I have a good place to live, and I'm pretty secure. So my grief is small, and I shouldn't be feeling bad about it. I don't really have a right to feel bad when other people are doing so much worse. And I may even feel a little guilty about it. But that's wrong. What seems like small grief actually may be very large. Your life has been seriously disrupted. And your present grief may be connecting you with past grief, with great losses that are very large. So it's okay to grieve. So I think it's an important principle about our personal response to isolation, that it is very helpful to acknowledge the difficulty of it, the uncertainty of it, and the messiness of it. We may have an ideal about how we're going to be at this time. What an opportunity. We're home with so few distractions. We can have a kind of a monastic experience, and we can meditate all the time, and we can be mindful, and we can attend lots of Zen Center programming, and do a lot of ritual, and we can always be kind and understanding to everyone we communicate with. And that is wonderful. And I think it's great to work toward those things, but it's okay if it doesn't always work out that way. And I think most of us are probably falling a little short of our goals. And that's okay, because regret only adds to the suffering. It's probably better to accept this as a bit of a mess. This is a hard time, right? And maybe it's not a mess for you. Maybe you're really thriving right now, and that's great. That's your reality to accept. But that's fully inhabiting our space, accepting the reality of it, whatever it is. And of course, absolutely vital to the process of accepting reality is compassion, being kind to ourselves, to accept how hard this is without self-recrimination, to extend to ourselves the same kindness that we extend to all others. I mean, we can see everyone else on this call here, right? And we just wish them the very best, and we love them, and we know they're doing their best, you know? Can we turn that same kindness toward ourselves? Yes, we're doing our best. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it doesn't work out, but compassion for everyone, compassion for ourselves, that is the thing. And we can work on this. We can spend time consciously during our meditation, bringing in the compassion of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and accepting it. Or we can do this in ritual. We can light a candle in front of the Buddha. We can call in the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and their great love for us and for all beings. And when we hear ourselves saying it shouldn't be this way, we can replace that thought with, well, but this is how it is now. So it is what it is, and we can accept the reality with great kindness, and we can go from there. And we can go from there, because none of this means that we don't try. We do try, always. We follow the Bodhisattva way of doing what is best for all beings, of being kind to all beings, including ourselves. When I talk about acceptance, as I said last week, I'm not talking about being passive. We accept the truth, we accept the reality of things, and then we do our very best to change those things that need to be changed and that we can change. We don't accept injustice. We don't accept defeat. And I'd like to talk a bit now about how we can respond to isolation. The simple principles are still best, I think. Routines are good. Exercise, eating well, limiting news intake, limiting screen time, and our practice, of course, meditation, mindfulness. Zen Center is here to support you in that, and there are many, many other resources out there that can support you in that. And having contact with others, that's so important, whether that's a Zoom lunch or a socially distanced walk or just a phone call, that contact is so important. And our attitude, I'm going to talk a little bit about my own experience while being mindful that it may be different from your own. Last time I talked about Shohaku's writing about how his life had been really constricted at one point and that it really opened up at another point. And I thought about my own experience. And I, like him, hope to be able to just continue living to fully inhabit my space, whether it is large or small. And I think I've always been drawn to the idea of living life in reduced circumstances. And maybe that's serving me well right now. Maybe it's not quite what I wanted, but maybe it's helping. I've always been drawn to the idea of living a really simple life. And I would like to think that's not so much wanting to escape the complexities of life, but really wanting to find a richness and a freedom in living life fully while eliminating distractions. I really loved Thoreau's Walden when I first read it, when I was maybe 10 or so, because it was about such a simple and deliberate life, building a little cabin in the woods, you know. And then when I was about 20, I read about Zen monasteries for the first time, and I was really drawn to that, and I really wanted to do that. And it probably didn't happen for another 25 years or so, but it did happen. And when I think about my whole life, there's one period that I really miss and really kind of idealize, and that's a time when I lived in my truck. That was a simple life. I wasn't homeless exactly. I was doing construction. I was building grain elevators in small towns in the Midwest and traveling from town to town. I think I worked in about 30 different towns. And I had a pickup truck with a camper on the back, and that's where I lived with my dog. And the camper, it was pretty small, but it was just tall enough to stand up in, and it had a place to sleep, and it had a table that I could fold down for reading, and an ice box, and a little stove, and a little bookshelf. And I would park at a job site or maybe a park. Sometimes there would be other folks working on the same job nearby, so we'd have a little community there. And I'd work 10 or 12 hours a day, and then in the evening I'd build a fire and cook something, and that was a lengthy and very pleasant process. And I could read in the camper. I had an electric light if there was a place to plug in, and if not, I would use candles. And it was just a lovely, simple existence. I was inhabiting my space. And there was something about the slowness of it, and the deliberateness of it, and the freedom of it that made me feel really connected with other things. The other construction workers, the job site, the town I was in, the rest of the world, because I did communicate through mail. I wrote letters to officials and things like that. And things came into my world and they went out again, and there was no need to look for a whole lot of other stuff. It was a good life, or at least that's the way I choose to remember it. I know I'm idealizing it some. Now, later in my life, things got more complicated, which is great. Eventually came marriage and kids and home ownership and some education and a job in a cubicle and co-guiding teacher at MZMC, and things got pretty complicated. And I would like to think that I've inhabited that world, which is much larger, in a way that connected me to all these things, but also connected me to the simple life that I once led, that I had the ability to find simplicity in my more complicated world. And now something really interesting has happened. Because of coronavirus, my world has greatly contracted again. And there are things about isolation I really enjoy. And I think that's true for a lot of us. A lot of people have said to me, well, you know, I'm an introvert and it doesn't feel that much different. And I don't mean to make light of this in any way. This is a real tragedy. This is real serious. But if we're going to acknowledge all aspects of it, we have to acknowledge that there are aspects of the present situation that are good. There's a slowing and a quieting of life for some people, maybe a rediscovering of more activities with the family, maybe more time in nature. There's less pollution, fewer cars, maybe a better understanding of interconnections. At least in the beginning, remember how everyone suddenly realized the value of people who prepare food and healthcare workers and all of these essential workers? And there's been a laying bare of the problems of our society. And that is a painful thing, but it's a helpful thing. There's a potential for real change brought about by how we're recognizing how dysfunctional our society is. After all, the New Deal followed the Great Depression. It didn't just happen. It was a response to a crisis. So I find myself inhabiting a smaller space. I'm really cautious. Kathy and I are cautious. She has an underlying health condition. We're both over age 60. So I seldom leave my house except for walks. To some people that would be excruciating, but to me it's a kind of voluntary monasticism and it works. I feel kind of content with it. And my days are kind of the same. I do Zen work. I do yard work. We have a lot of flowers. Our garden looks way better and our yard than it ever has or probably ever will again. We get down there with all of the details of the work, and it's really nice. It's good mindful work. So yeah, at the same time, it's a complex situation. There are a lot of things to worry about. It's not easy. I worry about friends and family. I worry about Zen Center and how the building project is going, and what about reopening and just keeping everybody together during this weird time when the building is closed. Will people stick with us? Will everything be okay? So I don't want to paint this as some ideal experience, but I do want to acknowledge the opportunities here. And so if we can accept the restrictions that we must accept and inhabit our restricted world fully, we'll be able to save our rage for the things that really are unreasonable and can be changed, if we're not raging against the things we can't change. So I hope that whatever your situation is, you'll be able to inhabit your space. And people I talk to seem to be doing that. As I've said again and again, I'm inspired by the people I talk to. I think it must be so hard for those of you who are required to physically go to work, for people who are isolating alone while working at home, people who are having very little human contact, and yet you're doing it. Everyone is doing what needs to be done, sticking to the routines, keeping up some contact with the world, doing the stuff, doing the practice, and keeping it all in balance. Acceptance of limitations does not mean giving up. It doesn't mean accepting unnecessary or harmful limitations. There is pushing back on isolation too. There's knowing when and where to go out. I'll admit that I'm way over on the cautious end of the continuum. I think it would be good for me to plan some more outings here. That would be good for my spirit. It would also keep me in better touch with the mainstream. So I think fully inhabiting my space probably means pushing the limits of my space a little bit. There are a lot of safe ways to do that, a lot of places to go. So I don't know, it's a balance. On the one hand, you might say, well, it might be easier on my psyche to just kind of say, well, I'm staying home, I'm keeping things small. And on the other hand, it might be easier on the psyche to say, I'm going to push back, I'm going out more. Everyone can find that balance for themselves. The thing is, I think, to be really flexible and open as to what the solutions might be, and to realize that whatever worked last week may not work this week. Confusion is likely. So we just keep going. We accept the messiness of the situation. We're kind to ourselves. We're open as to what might happen. We're open to trying different things. When the bird's need or the fish's need is great, the range is large. When the need is small, the range is small. In this way, each fish and each bird uses the whole of space and vigorously acts in every place. By fully inhabiting our life, we inhabit the universe. Inhabiting our life means being continually open and continually questioning and continually meeting the difficult moment. It does not mean mastering every moment or having a master plan or meeting some ideal. It means accepting the things we can't change and changing the things we can. We can't control coronavirus, but we can, to some extent at least, control our response to it. So we shall stick with it. That's what we're doing. And those are my reflections on the situation. And I would love to hear from some of you, comments, questions, maybe something you're doing during this period of isolation that you find helpful and you would like to share.